Thank you to Khatchig for inviting me to be part of today's panel, which he told me that the title, which I found to be very inspiring and homey, was Roots, Grassroots, and the Road to Justice, Activism for the 21st Century. My talk will also have three parts. The first about my roots in writing, the second about the importance of cross-justice, cross-issue, and cross-cultural solidarity, and the third about a specific grassroots social justice campaign with which I have been involved. And to increase the entertainment value, there will be slides. Part 1, Roots and Writing. This is my grandmother, Mariam Barsamian, with her family in Mersin circa 1910. This is my grandmother, now named Mary Kricorian, rocking a hula hoop in Watertown. I grew up in a two-family house in Watertown with my grandmother and uncle living in the upstairs apartment, and my parents, my sister, and me living downstairs. My grandmother was a constant presence in my life, making Armenian food, telling me stories about the old country, and waging a decades-long power struggle with my French-Canadian mother. After she was gone, Mary Kricorian became a muse for my writing. In the course of her career as my muse, she also became, again, Mariam Barsamian. My first novel, Zabel, is a fictionalized account of my grandmother's life as an Armenian genocide survivor and immigrant bride. I wrote the book in the years after my grandmother's death as a way of keeping her with me. I heard her voice and the voices of her friends, other Armenian women who had survived the genocide, some of whom had shared with me their stories. The novelist Toni Morrison said, "If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." I wanted to read a novel about an ordinary Armenian woman, not the first woman doctor in the state of Massachusetts, but a woman who had survived the deportations and the loss of her home, her family, and her way of life, and had gone on to make a new family and home, and had joined in the reconstruction of an Armenian community. At my first public event in the Boston area, I said this line about wanting to write about an ordinary Armenian woman, and in the front row of the audience, my grandmother's good friend Peter Bilazikian practically leaped out of his seat and shouted, "Your grandmother was no ordinary woman!" My grandmother was beloved, and my character Zabel was also beloved as everyone's adored, if flawed, mother and grandmother. My second novel, Dreams of Bread and Fire, was about someone in my generation growing up in the Armenian American community under the unspoken shadow of the genocide. It's a coming-of-age novel, and the protagonist, Ani Silver, is half Armenian. She hops a freight train, she has sex, she does some drugs, and she gets mixed up with a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary who sets off a bomb outside a Turkish Airlines office. 2003 was not a great moment for a book with a bomb in it, and the Armenian community was not enamored of Ani Silver, who was the daughter and granddaughter that nobody wanted. I wish I had called the book The Bad Armenian Girl. I think it would have sold more copies. But selling more copies has frankly never been my goal, nor has creating work that can be used as propaganda, no matter how noble or just the cause. Yasir Kemal, a Turkish novelist of Kurdish origin, once said, "Social realists may have a just cause, but politics threatens art. I don't write about issues, I don't write for an audience, I don't even write for myself, I just write." I can't claim to be as independent-minded as Kemal, and for me even just writing, when it is writing about Armenians, is a kind of art that invites, if it doesn't try to define, a politics. But I understand the tension between the claims of politics and an aspiration towards art. My third novel, All the Light There Was, is about Armenians in Paris during the Nazi occupation. I decided not to focus on heroes and heroic acts, such as French resistance leader Misak Manouchian, but rather chose as my main character a narrator and an Armenian girl who says in the first chapter, "This is the story of how we lived the war and how I found my husband." Of course, while doing research and interviewing octogenarian Armenians in Paris, I met with the last surviving member of the Manouchian group, sat with a member of the Hunchak resistance, and heard the story of a Soviet Armenian soldier who, while being held in a POW camp in Poland, was offered the opportunity to avoid starving to death by putting on a German uniform. I drew on all these narratives in the writing of my book. The final novel in what my editor has dubbed my Armenian Diaspora Quartet, the one I'm working on now, is set in the Armenian community of Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. I have come to think of this 4-volume project as a collage portrait of post-genocide Armenian diaspora life. Like all collages, it is an endeavor that is at once expansive in vision, but conscious that this vision is made up only of fragments, of bits and pieces, of reused and repurposed imagery and narratives. And here we come to part 2. This is from Occupy Wall Street protest in Manhattan in 2002. All our grievances are connected. Vasily Grossman, who lived from 1905 to 1964, was a Soviet-Russian writer and journalist. He was also a Jew whose mother was murdered by the Nazis at Berdichev. At the close of World War II, he was one of the first journalists to see and write about the Nazi death camps in his searing piece entitled The Hell of Treblinka. His masterpiece, the World War II novel Life and Fate, was never published during his lifetime because of the complex honesty of his portrayal of life under Stalin. The KGB confiscated the typescript in 1961, and the novel was not published in Russia until the late 1980s. In 1962, after the arrest of his novel, Grossman was offered a probably compensatory job translating a long Armenian war novel. He went to Armenia, where he wrote a memoir about his stay that is a humane and insightful meditation on Armenia and Armenians, and offers as well a subtle, understated analysis of power relations during Soviet times. In the final chapter, there is a poignant description of how, at a time when anti-Semitism was rampant in the Soviet Union, during the toasts at an Armenian village wedding, local people spoke with compassion about what had happened to the Jews during the Nazi occupation. Grossman wrote, "Never in my life have I bowed to the ground. I have never prostrated myself before anyone. Now, however, I bow to the ground before the Armenian peasants who, during the merriment of a village wedding, spoke publicly about the agony of the Jewish nation under Hitler, about the death camps where Nazis murdered Jewish women and children." We still live in a time when people's tribal loyalties often dictate political alliances, but this gesture of solidarity described by Grossman is to me a model of how we need to reach outside our own narrow interests to take up the struggles of people beyond our immediate community. It is a great thing to lobby for Armenian genocide recognition and to advocate for the Armenian cause, but for a progressive, these are insufficient. I wouldn't hope to dictate to anyone what issues to take up or what coalitions to join. There are so many. To name only a few examples, we have the climate crisis, scarily militarized policing in our cities, a war on drugs that is in actuality a war on people of color, a lawless drone assassination program being overseen by our current president, and human rights abuses from Kashmir to Palestine. When I was in Istanbul last month at an international feminist workshop on mass trauma, memorialization, and activism for change, the conference participants joined the Saturday Mothers people at their 495th weekly vigil for the disappeared. Most of the photos held during the demonstration were of Kurdish men who had been disappeared by the Turkish government in 1993 and 94. But among the sea of faces, I also saw several photos of Armenian intellectuals, such as Kricorian, who were arrested and murdered on April 24, 1915. The man who held that photograph was clearly not related to Tarosian, but here again, the simple act of making visible a single, near-forgotten image transformed that space of protest into something hopeful and transcendent. It also reinforced my commitment to the struggle for dignity, justice, and equality for all people. And here we come to part 3, where I talk about my involvement in the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in support of Palestinian rights. I have been a member of the staff of Code Pink Women for Peace since 2003. Code Pink is a women-initiated grassroots peace and social justice movement that uses direct action, street theater, and other creative tactics to disrupt the business of war as usual. In early 2009, after the Israeli assault on Gaza, referred to as Operation Cast Lead, we at Code Pink decided to take a stronger role in advocating for Palestinian rights. Some women led a delegation to Gaza on March 8th, International Women's Day, to witness and to bring attention to the devastation a few months after the bombing had ended. I was unable to go on the trip, but started work on what would become the Stolen Beauty Ahava boycott campaign, which was launched in June of 2009 and was Code Pink's first contribution to the Palestinian-led global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Ahava is an Israeli cosmetics company that has its manufacturing plant on stolen land in the occupied West Bank, and it uses pillaged resources in its products. What better target for a women's peace group than an Israeli cosmetics company whose practices are in direct violation of international law? A few years later, Code Pink took on a new campaign against SodaStream, an Israeli company that produces a home beverage maker. SodaStream's primary production facility is in an illegal Israeli West Bank settlement. Fast forward to January, this past January, when Scarlett Johansson was named brand ambassador for SodaStream, while she was also serving as an Oxfam Goodwill ambassador. Yeah, I love this image, right? This is one of the checkpoints in the West Bank, with Scarlett sipping her SodaStream. In 2009, the Stolen Beauty campaign had successfully pressured Oxfam into suspending Sex and the City's starlet and Ahava spokesmodel Kristen Davis from publicity work as a Goodwill ambassador because of her association with an Israeli settlement company. So we knew that ScarJo, SodaStream, and Oxfam were going to make a perfect triangular target. I joined an international media and social media team to take up the work of hammering on all three. We were able to use social media to drive the media to cover our campaign. We set up a thunderclap that attracted over 1,600 supporters with a social media reach of over 1.7 million. This itself was reported as a news story. Then the photoshopped images of Scarlett Johansson, her soda, and occupied Palestinians went viral. At this point, ScarJo quit her role at Oxfam and claimed she was building a bridge to peace by shilling for SodaStream. We had our biggest press win, and there were literally hundreds of press hits on this campaign, including this from the Pan-Arabian Inquirer, the ScarJo IKEA room divider. We had our biggest press win when the Financial Times said in an editorial, Ms. Johansson says the company is building a bridge to peace between Israel and Palestine. The way to create Palestinian jobs is to end the occupation and let Palestinians build those foundations, not to build bridges to peace on other people's land without their permission. SodaStream, which is a publicly traded company, has taken a drubbing on the stock market because of all the negative publicity, and our campaign continues to grow. Of course, helping run social media campaigns takes away precious time from writing, and there is no clearly articulable link between the world of my novels and the world of 21st century activism. But there is, even if not clear, a connection. It turns out that telling the stories of people who exist on the margins of history and amplifying the voices of women who are seldom heard in mainstream media narratives are models for seeking justice. Storytelling serves as a connective tissue in a world, and for Armenians, not just the present world, but the world of history and our place within it, that would otherwise be a seemingly inchoate collection of bits and pieces. And for me, another bond between fiction and activism is an impulse to amplify the humane in the human.
Thank you, Nancy. You quoted Yashar Kemal, by the way, that amazing quote. And in fact, there's also a connection. There's an Armenian connection to everything, of course. And in Yashar Kemal's case, in 1951, the Armenian church on Akhtamar Island, Khatchig Church, was going to be demolished. This was a period from in the 1950s and 60s when the Turkish state, the Turkish military, was systematically demolishing whatever Armenian churches that were still standing at that point. And Yashar Kemal was on a trip to the region, and he witnesses how there were preparations to demolish the Armenian church in Subkhatch on Akhtamar Island. And in fact, they had already demolished a smaller chapel nearby. So he's clearly outraged. And again, this is one of the most prominent writers of 20th century Turkey. He was clearly outraged, and he goes and complains. He goes all the way up to one of the military leaders of the region. And he tells him, this is one of the most iconic cultural heritage sites in this entire area. How can you blow this up? And eventually, because of that intervention, the military leader essentially calls the local officials and tells them to freeze the operation until they hear back from him. And eventually, he checks in with Ankara and pressures them, and that's how eventually the blowing up of the Akhtamar church was halted. For this effort of his, a couple of months ago, the Armenian government gave him a medal for saving the Akhtamar church. So this is another reference to that. Now, I'd like to invite our both panelists to sit here and have a conversation with the audience, David and Nancy. So please, now this is your opportunity to ask questions to our panelists about anything they said or did not say. Yes?
I'm going to choose my words very carefully since I come from a place where ignorance is not bliss. I recently turned 22, and what both of you said was so incredibly powerful and immediately reminded me of an intellectual struggle I've always had since I was learning about my identity as an Armenian ever since I was a child. And it's interesting how we get the dichotomy of...
If we could take
Take
the
a mic up there.
microphone, it could be heard better. Thank you.
It's very interesting to see the dichotomy of being presented our history, the world we live in, and then the end note of the future is on you. I mean, I think your words are going to haunt me the rest of my life, that you're closer to the end, whereas I, at 22, have still a long ways to go, unless I'm driving on Glen Oaks and things get rough. So my question, my question has been that in a world where everybody with their power and money and means to an end, what are we to do, really? Because it just seems so desolate, and at the same time, too, we've been speaking about what has happened. We have advocated for it, and 100 years is coming up of what has happened, and the injustices that have gone on have repeated themselves in various shapes and forms. And if this cancer is metastasizing and things are increasingly growing more and more horrendous, again, I come from a place of ignorance as to what I am supposed to do, how I'm supposed to contribute. I'm merely in the role of a student now, but besides advocating and activism and speaking about the very realities of human evil being overpowered by human memory, which is the reason why a lot of us are sitting here right now, I would think, or conjecture, what viable solutions are there? That's always been my biggest question as an Armenian American, wondering how we go about our personhood and how to make this world a better place and not keep repeating people killing each other. And hearing your mother's words again, I think will haunt me just as much as your words. So again, don't want to think of it as being very desolate, but what can we do?
Well, thank you for that question and comment. It's one that comes up at every single meeting I address, and I address mostly non-Armenian audiences. What is to be done? Actually, Comrade Lenin wrote a book with that title, not John Lennon, the other one. There's a lot that can be done. I think the first thing we have to do is identify the problems. If we misidentify the problems, and I think I tried to put forth that there's a big problem with imperialism, there's a big problem with capitalism, with misogyny, with patriarchy. If we misidentify the problems, then the solutions we propose will be totally futile. So we have to, identify the issues. Everyone has particular talents. I don't know what your particular talents are. They may be writing, they may be public speaking, they may be editing. There's something for everyone to do in terms of activism. Now, you're in a fairly privileged part of the country. There are groups here that are active that you can get involved with, that you can engage. As I said, it's always a struggle when people get together, because guess what? We're deeply flawed. And there are always conflicts and tensions. I alluded to that, and and ego clashes, and it's just not perfect. I mean, look at KPFK, this radio station that you have here, which should be one of the most successful media operations in not just the country but in the world. And actually, in New York, it's replicated at WBAI, where there's
Come on, it's left politics. Everybody's always fighting.
there's an enormous amount of internal, friction. And what happens as a result of that? People get discouraged, they walk away, it's not perfect. I couldn't get my way in the meetings ran on, I have a life to live, I can't go to meetings, someone is laughing, I guess you go to some of those meetings. But, let's just look back to in the lifetime of some of the people in this room. I'm old enough to remember Rosa Parks, not sitting in the back of the bus. By the way, that was the third or fourth attempt to launch the Montgomery bus boycott in Alabama in 1955. They didn't succeed initially. And Rosa Parks, even Bill Moyers, who should know better, said that Rosa Parks was a tired seamstress who had a hard day at work, and that's why she didn't want to sit in the back of the bus. Complete fabrication, of course. She was trained in nonviolence at the Highlander Center in Tennessee. She knew all about civil disobedience. She didn't have a lot of advantages, but she took action. And, there was a kind of cosmological confluence that took place, because a young preacher had just moved to Montgomery from Atlanta, Martin Luther King Jr., who never, no one had ever heard of, and that's how the Montgomery bus boycott began. So you start with a single step. That wonderful Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one small step. You start with something in your community. Maybe you can teach ESL to all the, to many of the immigrants that need training in ESL. I don't know what you might be able to do, but there's so many possibilities. There's so many organizations. I don't know if Code Pink is active in the Valley, but maybe you could start a chapter here in Glendale or on campus if you're a student. No, I mean that quite seriously. Or maybe you can get involved with KPFK 90.7 FM. Volunteer, do a program. Say you want to, cover Middle Eastern issues. You want to talk about what's going on in the Caucasus, with Azerbaijan, with Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a very interesting thing, what just happened in Scotland with the referendum. Will the Armenians be able to conduct a referendum to decide their fate in the future? This is also a big question in Spain, in Catalonia. They want the right to self-determination. So there's a lot of things to do, and you know yourself best. And you shouldn't rely on people telling you, you do this. I can only just throw some ideas out, but ultimately you have to find that thing where, and I know I did this, I know none of you know this, but I actually studied Indian sitar music in India for many years. You can see how successful I was at that. But I stopped playing about 20 or 30 years ago because I didn't feel authentic. I felt phony. And I think but I didn't feel that way with doing radio and public speaking. I felt, I found something that was real. And I think that's important, to find something where you feel, your integrity is flourishing, as it were, where you feel, authentic. And so I gave up that career of playing in Bangladeshi restaurants on East 6th Street in New York for a couple of dollars a night. And I decided to start doing radio and activate my radical politics, which were always latent, in the background. And just one final thing. I have CDs over here of Araksi Barsamian's testimony, also introduced by Robert Fisk, It's a 1-hour program. It's nationally and internationally broadcast. I'm offering it for free to anyone here. There are 25 copies. If you like to make a donation or a contribution to alternative radio, great. If not, just grab one, enjoy it, make copies, spread the word.
Thank you. Nancy?
Oh, I don't know that I have that much to add to that, except for my personal motto is one of my heroes was an American writer and activist named Grace Paley. I'm sure you knew Grace. I knew Grace, and one of her lines is, "The only recognizable feature of hope is action," and that's my motto. And so that's the first thing is you create hope by acting, and then also just find the smart, interesting people who have sense of humor, who are working on something that that you care about, and there should be joy in your activism and fun as well as just plain hard work. So that's what I would say.
Yes.
So my question is, or my comment is, I mean, I know a lot of people in the audience might consider
Do we
it a
need the
little-
mic again?
So I guess my comment / question is, I know perhaps a lot of people in the audience might find it a bit premature to sort of think about a moment when, let's say, Armenians or Armenia may be within the prevailing power structures of the world, but how do we sort of hope to get there without losing our own souls? Is there a way of sort of making that more likely?
You want to address that question?
You couldn't wait to answer that.
Yeah, that's a really tough question, and I get a little bit uncomfortable when words like soul is used. Thomas Friedman, in an extremely racist column in the New York Times last week, even by his standards and the standards of David Brooks, these are two guys competing for chief moralizer of the United States. Friedman is still way ahead, but Brooks is catching up. He asked if the Arabs in the Muslim world had a soul. They never asked whether Buddhists in Sri Lanka who are massacring Hindus, or Buddhists in Myanmar who are massacring Muslims, if they have a soul. But it's always the Muslims that are held out for these kinds of questions. I don't know the answer to your question, quite frankly. I really can't think of how does one maintain integrity and honesty. I think to be true to your values and to the values of humankind are, I think, laudable goals and something that we should strive for. But I'm not quite sure I got the drift of your question or comment.
I mean, I guess I was sort of trying to paint the picture of, okay, we see like Armenian lobby activities tend to sort of frame themselves as if AIPAC is the model and Israel is the hope. You know what I mean? And it's like, I mean, we don't want to, I mean, clearly we're in a position where we have been oppressed and we've had all the richness that's come with it in terms of the complexity of the identity, all these thoughts that we're able to share with each other, and it's wonderful, it's beautiful. But I mean, that could easily vanish, let's say. I mean, earlier, Noam Chomsky was talking about capitalism has its own internal logic. So does, human social groupings also have that same tendency towards getting lost and drifting and getting lost with the shuffle. And so how do we best prepare ourselves? Or is there even a way? Or is it just grim, the prospect?
I'm not entirely understanding. You're saying that if Armenia and Armenians achieve power,
Yes,
that how when you have power, how do you not then turn into a victimizer?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there are enough Armenians for. I don't know. I just don't. I could be wrong, I just don't see that happening. It's very interesting, though, that you say this thing about, the Armenian lobby comparing them, comparing ourselves to AIPAC, and I'm on the board of the Armenian Tree Project. And sometimes people say, oh, we have to be like the Jewish National Fund. And I say, no, actually, the Jewish National Fund plants non-native trees on confiscated land. We plant native trees on Armenian land. We don't want to do what they're doing. We want to do what we're doing and just do what we're doing better. So.
Well, I wasn't expecting an answer. I just
Okay,
wanted
let's
to-
please let's answer. Yes, thank you for the question. But who else has a question? Yes, and then you're next.
I'm also a student of the Satar, by the way. I don't know if you can hear me.
She can't hear.
Hello. Hello.
Stand and talk. You'll project better.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? My question is regarding, I'm really interested in state building in Armenia and our diaspora populations. So one fact I always throw out there when I'm talking to people about Armenia and really educating them on our past and where current developments are going is the fact that most Armenians live outside of Armenia, and our population within the country is getting smaller and smaller. So I'm really interested in how efforts that the diaspora community is doing abroad, whether it's here in Los Angeles or in Toronto or France or wherever it may be where we have large populations coming together, how that can be related to actual state building efforts in Armenia, because a lot of times when I'm there, I see a big disconnection, especially among youth, because I was born in Yerevan, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and I've been able to travel to other countries because I have an American passport, and I have the opportunity to go and to really compare my experience as an Armenian American to, I lived in Rwanda for 5 months, and I was able to go and really connect with another nation that is struggling with post-genocide restoration. But I still have trouble whenever I go back to Armenia to really feel that same level of motivation and energy among people that are my age, and even people that are not my age, that are older than me, and like really seeing that hope for the future. So, yeah.
I'm the moderator, guys. Nancy, perhaps you'd like to address this through your experience with the Armenian Tree Project. I mean, involvement from the diaspora in the process of.
I know, but it's really hard because you go back there, and I'm just going to say it's like gangster capitalism run amok, right? So I think that people are leaving because there's not that much hope. There's a very, it's huge stratification society with some very wealthy people and then very poor people and middle class people getting out of there, right? I mean, that's my impression. But I would say the thing that gave me hope was actually meeting, there's a lot of young people and even, not so young people who are involved in all kinds of civil society movements within Armenia, and you want to support them. That's what I would, see, like, there's a woman I met named Arpine Galfayan, who I met her at the Armenians in Progressive Politics conference in New York a couple of years ago. Fantastic, doing all this, like, environmental organizing. And then my friend Lara Aharonian, who's running the Women's Center and the Domestic Violence Hotline, and Ramikon Hovsepian, who's running Pink Armenia, the LGBTQ, advocacy organization. It would, a way to support is just to find the people who are there, who are doing that kind of stuff, and see how you can be involved. Or like with the Tree Project, I feel like is, when I go and I look at the tree nurseries and see the people employed there, go and look at the Environmental Education Center and see, they're trying to raise up a generation of kids who have a sense of environmental stewardship, so that it's like a multi-generational process, I think, of sort of undoing, that Soviet mentality and like
and the post-Soviet gangster capitalism and supporting these sort of civil society movements. I mean, that's what I would say.
I mean, one important aspect is that I think, and you've both been talking about this, right? Perhaps the word was never mentioned, the issue of solidarity, right? The way, we look at Armenia, we should not think of charity as much as we should think about solidarity, right? This, horizontal relationship where we engage with the challenges facing Armenia today, whether it's gender issues, whether it's all kinds of social justice issues, right? And this, I think, connects to your question as well, right? I think one of the ways it all depends on how you define powerful, right? For me, a powerful Armenia is an Armenia where many of the important issues within the borders are addressed, are tackled, as much as we tackle the issues that have to do outside of the borders. And if we can't find a balance like that, that would be not necessarily a regional power, but it would be a nation, a place where people don't want to leave, where people want to go, and where people really can connect and remain attached to and dedicated to. Yes.
Yeah. So my question is, I want to bring it back to progressive Armenian politics. And in my opinion, in the last 20, 25 years, progressive Armenian politics lost both its ability to identify the right issues and, more importantly, lost its activism. When I compare generations from like 20, 30 years ago compared to today's generation, the contrast is very, very big. So I want to bring back the issue into something very contemporary. Maybe we can't take action, but maybe we can show solidarity and have a view on an issue. And the question is to both of you. I would like to see your perspective on it. Today, if an Armenian progressive movement came to you and said, we are struggling with an editorial and we want to send a statement to what's happening in Syrian Kurdistan and the besieged town of Kobani. And we as progressive Armenians wanted to issue, we're not going to send 500 fighters from Beirut or Buchamud, but I think we can tweet a headline to to show solidarity to the PKK and the YPG fighting ISIS and being surrounded by Turkish forces on the other side. What advice would you give to that editorial board?
What advice would I give to the editorial board? Fight for social justice, and state your convictions clearly and forcefully, and don't compromise.
So what would it say? What are Armenians saying to Kurds today in 2014? Because I personally don't care about the Armenian genocide memorial being blown up in Deir Zor. I care more about hundreds of thousands of Kurds being massacred right now.
Well, the latter is not happening. Certainly people are in great danger, and some thousands have been killed, but not to the extent that...
They're in danger of.
Possibly. I, for one, think the ISIS threat has been hyped up enormously by the Pentagon and the propaganda machine in order for other geopolitical reasons, but that's not the question you were asking. I think, that we should write a clear statement, or the board should write a clear statement in support, in solidarity of the people in that region. I don't feel that I'm an Armenian first. I feel I'm a human being first. So I want to approach issues from that. I happen to be Armenian, I happen to have this background, but I feel, the human part of being a person is more important than ethnic identity, even though ethnic identity can inform the former. So I would see it as a humanitarian call for justice, for peace, for demilitarization in that area. And it's again an outcome of U.S. foreign policy that those people are so threatened in that area, which the U.S. has been trying, and Turkey, to overthrow the regime of Bashar al-Assad. This has been going on now for the last 3 years, and they have introduced, as they did in Afghanistan in the 1980s, the most extreme, violent, murderous people that they could find in order to maximize violence and to speedily topple the regime in Damascus. So, I think we have a lot of work to do here in changing U.S. foreign policy and U.S. attitudes toward the region, which has just been seen as an adjunct to an oil well, natural gas, and support for Israel. I mean, that's really what it's all about. If the Middle East only consisted of dates and khorma or whatever, no one would care. Not at least among the power brokers in Washington. So we have to, identify the problem and change it here. We have a lot of work to do here.
Thank you.
I'm
Any
good.
questions? Garrett. Oh, do you want to say something?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, Garrett.
No, I want to thank Afi for bringing things to the part of the geography that interests me. But before I ask my question, I'm just going to invite you to speak to the two ladies 3 rows in front of you. And my answer to your question is join, join, join. And I think the action comment that you meant, Nancy, is right. Err on the side of doing. It's easy to fix things if you screw up. My question is, taking what you guys presented and put it in the context of what Khatchig's done a lot of also, is moving our focus back into Western Armenia. I'm kind of tired of the imbeciles in Yerevan, the robber barons you referred to. So I'm interested in refocusing on the larger chunk of our real estate. Please speak to that, wide open. With the problem that, the more we go, the more we legitimize the occupation. But if we don't, then we're screwed also. So if you have any insights, I'd appreciate it.
Nancy, you recently were in the region?
No, but I'm going to say something super unpopular. I was just traveling around there, and it's occupied Western Armenia. It's also Kurdistan. When you're traveling like there, and everybody wants to put their flag on it, and everybody wants to put their border, and you know what I'm saying? It's a very complicated thing, and I know there's panels tomorrow that are going to be addressing this directly. I don't know.
One of the challenges, if you talk to Kurdish activists, right, they will complain that all the time when they're talking to Turkish audiences, when they say Kurdistan, the Turkish audiences would immediately say, so where is this on the map? We don't see a Kurdistan here, right? And now that's why when you talk to them and you say Western Armenia, for example, they immediately make that connection. They say, okay, hold on, I'm not going to say, where is that on the map? Because that's exactly what people do when I talk about my cultural heritage.
Right, but the thing that was so interesting to me was when I was just at this feminist conference in Istanbul, we were there, one of the people who was participating with us was Susan Meiselis, the photographer who did this enormous book about Kurdistan. And she set up also this website called AKA Kurdistan, which is a online archive, because the Kurds don't have an archive. And so she had, and anybody can add to it. And so she wanted to, we were having a depot, an art exhibit that went along with this feminist conference. And Susan wanted to do a map on the wall of Kurdistan, and then it would have this story map. So there would be the map, there would be photos, and there would be narratives that would go with the photos. And it was and she was going to use this map of Kurdistan that was proposed in the 40s, some peace conference or something. And she was told it was too controversial, so they had to paint the map on the wall with the cities, but no borders. Because even to draw the borders in that context would have drawn probably, official sanction.
But I think the question here goes beyond the issue of borders, right? It goes back to the issue of this being the site where the Armenian, essentially the bedrock of Armenian civilization, etc., etc. And I think that can be addressed even without the issue of the borders, right? I mean, seeing these places, what's the connection with these places, etc., etc.
The borders issue is still way the heck off,
yes.
And as far as I'm concerned, it's legally settled. So what do we do to get there? President Wilson's
Okay,
Arbiter
so let
report.
me take a couple of, I think there's I'm learning as we go. I'll take a couple of questions and then ask the panelists to address it, because that might actually give them a little more room to pick and choose. Yes?
Apparently there is Armenian immigration to Turkey now. I don't know if you're aware of it. And I was just wondering, and you know, in keeping with what you're talking about, there are actually Armenians leaving Armenia to go work in Turkey because they cannot survive with the robber barons in Armenia. And I'm just wondering if there's anybody who knows about that or has something to say about it or comment about it.
Thank you. Who else had a question?
Wait for tomorrow.
Yes.
I wanted to kind of treat this as a conversation and almost respond to his question. I think we're really, you know, being in the diaspora, I think we're really quick to criticize the imbeciles in Yerevan and to really move our attention quickly to reparations because it's really appealing and it's really, you know, we feel really strongly about it. Yeah, we feel really strongly about the reparations issue, but I think unless we actually address repatriation and issues like that, and also the fact that Yerevan and Armenia, modern Armenia proper, thank you. I mean, where mining, it's crumbling, gangster politics, I mean, all these things that we have to really realize that we can't even handle the small chunk of land that is under our name, that is our homeland, that was fought for and spilled blood for. So before we go on to reparations, let's be united, let's really address our identity, let's focus on things that we can address one by one before we bite off more than we can chew. That's kind of what I wanted to throw out.
Okay, further comments and questions? Yes.
I just want to add to that, if I may, if that's okay. I just think that it's what you're saying is very common in our community's discourse, but I think it's very dangerous. I think it's important for us to realize and recognize that reparations and talking about Western Armenia and justice for the genocide is not separated from current day Armenia. Those taking care of the Armenia we have now is not a separate issue from reparations. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Reparations are, today's Armenia is suffering the consequences of genocide just as much as our diaspora communities are. So reparations are what today's Armenia needs to overcome these difficulties like corruption and poverty. So I don't think they're mutually
Yes,
exclusive.
and I think, thank you, and I'd like to add one thing to that, and I think we can actually walk and chew gum at the same time. I think as a community, as a nation, as diaspora, as any, right, we can struggle for social justice in Armenia, we can struggle for justice for the genocide, and these two things need not be mutually exclusive. Yes?
I want to come back to progressive politics and see if we can talk about what we have here. Throughout the years of my going to school, being active in radical politics, I've always had this difficulty in explaining or getting progressives to take up the Armenian cause, to be concerned about what the Armenian people have gone through. We had 25,000 massacred in Azerbaijan in the early 90s. We had hundreds of thousands of refugees thrown out of Azerbaijan by the newly formed government. I didn't see a progressive lift a finger. I didn't see pink, yellow, orange code groups get together. I didn't see anyone. KPFK barely talked about it. I told you, I'm an old Social Workers Party member. I've been involved in left politics. I couldn't even get the word in edgewise about Armenians and the cause of Armenians. You're progressives. Tell us what we can do to try and attract their attention, to get them involved and be concerned about the hundreds of thousands of people that are now in Montana, have chosen to become evangelists because they had to escape Baku and come here, and Christian groups, Middle America, gave them visas. They came here. They could care less if they're Armenian anymore. They've taken up religions that I can't even think of. And so what do we do? What,
I
how do
think,
we
yes,
get
thank
this?
you, and I think this is a great question to end with, right? You know, and you know, if you have any comments about everything that was said, and this final question, and we'll conclude.
Progressives.
I have similar grievances. Like right before I started writing for ZNet, this was years ago when I was in Lebanon. You know, I searched the website. There was not a single reference to the Armenian genocide. And again, we talk about why Armenians are not involved more in progressive issues, but there's the other question, which is why the progressive left in America or in general doesn't find the Armenians perhaps worthy victims, right, of discussion. So perhaps this is a topic that is worth addressing.
Well, I'm going to Montana in a couple of weeks, and I'll look
Find
into
them.
this very. You're saying there are hundreds of thousands?
No, not in Montana. Hundreds of thousands who were forced out of Azerbaijan, scattered throughout the mountain states, Wyoming, in Boulder. You'll hear them speaking Russian. In Denver, you'll find them.
Yeah, I know.
Baku
I
Armenian
know a
community.
few of them, indeed. Well, it's again the issue of articulation, of formulating positions that are powerful and telling stories. I think by telling stories, that's how we make connections. This particular radio broadcast went all across the US and Canada, and it was played on KPFK and other community and Pacific stations. I still get comments from people to this day about that particular broadcast. So there are some openings. I won't say it's a flourishing situation where Armenians can be heard, but there are a lot of interventions. I mean, Serge Tankian had a program on with Tom
I like the
Morello.
word intervention.
You like that word?
Yeah.
This is a good interventions,
For
not the
crazy
U.S.
people.
Military interventions. Axis of Justice with Tom Morello. That was a program that was on KPFK. System of a Down made some impact, particularly among young people here and in the diaspora. So there, it's not. I would not say it's an absolute monolithic situation. There are cracks, there are openings, but it's our job, like Gramsci said, to find those cracks, to find those openings, and breathe energy into them, and to make them wider. And look what, I'm not tooting my own horn here. I have no background in journalism. I have no particular talent in what I'm doing. I'm like self-taught. But I just started this radio program because I was fed up with the corporate media. And it's now broadcast on 175 stations around the U.S. And Canada. So there are openings. I know that the Azerbaijan issue and the refugees and the massacre in Sumgait was covered more in the New York Times than anywhere else at the time. The progressive media, we're not talking about powerful institutions here. We're not talking about Time Warner or Murdoch's News Corporation. We're talking about The Nation magazine, the Progressive magazine, ZNet. There are a handful of magazines and outlets out there. But I think it's our responsibility, and I don't remember, I'm ashamed to say, of contacting any of those magazines or newspapers during that time of the Sumgait massacre and what was going on in Baku, and I'm ashamed of that. But we need to not stand idly by, make interventions where we can, and if they won't listen, create alternative media.
I'd like to hear Nancy's.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it's not just about getting other people to pay attention to our story. It's that if you go out and make the connections by being engaged in solidarity with other people, your presence there will then bring, and your presence there and your story there will draw attention to the Armenian thing in the moment that you're showing solidarity for other people. For example, with Occupy Wall Street, I got involved in a group that called Occupy Wall Street Global Justice Working Group. There are all these hundreds, dozens of different working groups. And Global Justice, it was like all these different people who came, Iranian people, I was there as an Armenian, there were Palestinians, and we were all working together, telling and helping to amplify each other's work and each other's stories by being there together. So I think that it's also by showing solidarity for other people's struggles that you can then get them to show solidarity for yours.
Thank you. So some of the topics that you wanted to address. Okay, so is it a brief question, comment?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very brief.
Go ahead.
So I just want to say, hi everyone, good evening, that we're part of resistance here, and we're part of movement building here, and us being here is actually a really great testament to the history and legacy that we all inherited as Armenian people. I want to say first, number one, Code Pink has a chapter here. I'd love to talk to you about it. Number two, youth are alive and well. The Armenian community, especially in Los Angeles, around the entire nation, is talking about these issues. We're working in social justice. We're talking with other communities. And there are two huge forces that are making us all think that this is hopeless or that we're not doing these things. Number one, it's a lot of self-doubt that we get from everywhere in our media, in assimilation that tells us that we shouldn't love our ethnic identity, that we shouldn't be with other Armenians, that we should, kind of be amorphous here, and also in imperialism, honestly, in understanding how also we have to bear our second half, which is our American national identity, and how that affects other people. And we should know it innately because we have been oppressed, and that's why. And the best part about it is we don't have to be monolithic. We don't all have to speak with one voice. We can be united, but that doesn't mean we have to be the same. So Western Armenia, we can take arms with a bit. We can talk about it because my family came from Western Armenia. Folks who are coming from Yerevan, who are talking, we can bridge those bridges. But it's important that we have multiple voices, that we look at these things as intersectional, not as singular issues, because we're not single issue people, So I just have to address this, if it seems like things aren't happening, maybe you just haven't connected into them, So I wanted to ask, I guess you all, in your history of activism, looking at where youth have gone and where they will go, because they are going so many beautiful places right now, let me tell you, and let you all get involved. How do you foresee the 100th as a milestone, as a beginning? How are we going to move forward? Because I think that's the question we need to leave. We have the past of activism, we have the resistance that have taught us what we should be doing, and we have solidarity to teach us what we can do. But what does the future look like in terms of all of us collectively? And you for answering these questions.
Thank you. I'm going to leave that question open for tomorrow. Okay. Tomorrow we're going to be discussing Turkish-Armenian relations, Western Armenia. Many of the issues that were raised here will be addressed tomorrow, so please be patient about that. And thank you all for your patience, thank you all for being here, and thank you for our panelists.